Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader reading books for you. Today, I will be reading Chapter 32 from Two Worlds, a novel of friends and foes from strange places, written by Laura T. Lee. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links for me to find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 32 Elves! Lily stopped in her tracks as the familiar voice traveled over the ground. I will spare you and your city for a price. Give me the human girl. Teresa, where are you? Lily yelled. Show yourself. The queen of the dwarfs laughed. Why would I be foolish enough to reveal myself? You know that your friends are already outnumbered. Surrender, and I will save you from your doom. Lily looked around uncertainly. All around her, elves and dwarfs had stopped fighting, listening to Teresa's evil words. Several elves were whispering in one another's ears, pointing at Lily. Stacy appeared behind Lily. Teresa, we know you're there, she called. Stacy, it's so good to see you again. I will spare you from seeing the destruction of your friends and their city. How long will it be until you are under my control again? Attack the dwarves! Tara ordered. The elf fighters paid her no attention. Capture the girl! The queen of the dwarves thundered, and your home will not be harmed. The elves snapped out of their trance and started to move again. Half of the elf army was concentrating on battling the dwarves, but the other half was trying to grab Lily. Hundreds of elves were tripping over one another to give Lily over to Teresa. Lily held up her sword and dagger in a defensive X. Get back! She screamed. She kicked the closest elf back into the crowd. A familiar elf from behind raised his sword and began to force some of the other elves back. As she was preparing to thank Jake, she realized that something was off. This elf looked like Jake, but he was dressed a little differently and was also taller. Parker, how many times do I have to tell you to stop trying to save our lives? Jake complained, somewhere else near Lily. Jake's older brother grinned. He doesn't know anything, he whispered. He turned to face Jake, who was about 20 feet away. Don't worry, baby brother. I'll always get the enemies before you, he called back. Parker jumped back into the elf crowd before Jake could reach him with his sword. Nearby, Tara was fighting sword to sword with another elf, her sword flashing as it knocked the blade out of the other elf's hands. She kicked the weaponless elf back into the crowd. Stacy ran over. Don't trust any elf that looks dangerous, she called. All of the elves looked dangerous, Lily thought. Lily, back away, Jake said. Lily backed up and the crowd pressed forward. She threw an ultra-explosive grenade high in the air, and it soared in a graceful arc toward the ground. When it exploded, it knocked most of the elves in the front row off their feet. The dwarves sent a firebomb into the sky. It detonated in midair and a wave of fire roared over the elves. Elves ran around in confusion. Several had been hit by the fire and were stumbling around, wailing. Tara was sitting on the ground, hugging her leg to herself. Lily ran over and Tara said, "Ow!" "Can you walk?" Lily asked. Tara glared at her. "Oh, good question. I've just been knocked over by a dwarf bomb, and I landed on my leg. You think I can walk?" she demanded. "Yes." Lily helped Tara get to her feet. Tara sat back down near the base of the hill, away from the battle. "Give me 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll be as good as new," she promised. Lily left her in the grass and ran over to Stacy. "Any luck?" she asked. "Nah." Lily punched an elf in the face. "Any ideas about how we can stop this?" "Nah." Stacy hacked her metal stick and fired a crackling bolt of pure electricity into the dwarf army. "I wouldn't get too close to the dwarves if I were you," she said. "You do not know what dwarf breath smells like." Lily shuddered with revolution. Somewhere nearby, Jake yelled, "Go away, you stupid dwarves!" Lily threw a grenade in his general direction into the dwarf crowd. "You should hide before anyone spots you," Stacy advised. "There!" an elf shrieked, pointing at Lily. "Too late," Lily grumbled. She gripped her sword and dagger and shouted, "Your city will not be destroyed. Teresa, the queen of the dwarfs, is planting lies into your mind. Get back!" For one blissful moment, the crowd of elves obeyed, wavering uncertainly. Then they came back to their senses and ran forward. "Get into the dwarf crowd!" Tara called. Lily stepped sideways and ran into the dwarf army. The crowd stopped their chase, screaming in rage. She ran deeper into the dwarfs, sprinting over rocks and whacking dwarfs, avoiding their bad breath. Boom! Boom! Lily looked to her left. The dwarfs had brought catapults with them. They were firing huge clumps of dirt towards the elves. A dwarf ran into Lily, causing her to stumble out of the crowd. A dirt ball sailed toward her. Lily slashed upward with her sword, and it split neatly in half before crumbling to dust on either side of her. Tara stood up and picked up her own sword. She ran into the dwarves like a lawnmower. Elves scattered as dirt slammed into the ground. Jake ducked as a dwarf nearly smacked into his head, launched into the air by a clump of dirt. Lily spotted a small ledge over a tiny cave on the side of the hill, hidden from the elves' and the dwarfs' view. "Guys, let's go!" she yelled. Tara, Stacy, Jake, and Lily made their way behind the hill and under the ledge. "So," Jake said, "what's the plan?" "I don't have one," Lily replied. "Well, that's just great," Tara grumbled. The vines hanging above the ledge began to swing in the air, but there was no wind to move them. Lily rested her hand on the hilt of her sword. "Guys, there's something wrong." The vines whipped around, lashing themselves together and extending so that they attached to the ground. Tara hit them with her sword, but it clanged off. In the suddenly dim light, Lily could see screws on the vines. I think we're trapped, she noted. Stacy yelped in surprise. Why is the wall doing something weird? They whipped around to find that the wall was rippling like a mirage, rumbling loudly. A small opening formed in the middle. Teresa's voice echoed around the area. I will only let the human in. I really hate that voice, Lily grumbled. She turned and said to the others, Stay here, try to find a way to get out. She headed into the tunnel. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Chapter 33. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.